So, hello to everybody who's watching this. This is gonna be slightly off key. It's just this little discussion. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, ever since the Legion came out, just to have a little discussion about what's been shown off and the direction of the game, and more how it compares to Warlords and everything else. So I'm going to have a little discussion with my brother here,
Howdy.
and there's a couple things specifically that have been shown off as of the last couple days, which motivated me more to do this discussion. So let's just get right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's now evidence of a treasure demon. Sorry, a treasure demon, in the game, which anybody who's played Diablo would be familiar with. It's not a very hard spot. It casts as escape portal as soon as you engage it, and it drops loot based on how you hit it, and if you kill it, it's assumed it drops either more loot or very specific types of loot.
It's actually interesting because at this present time, it says that the only thing that it drops is sanctuary coins. The loot
sanctuary
element of it is yet to be seen. I'm curious if it will drop anything of note.
I imagine it will. I imagine, because they said earlier that there was going to be something you could do to increase the odds of you getting legendaries, which is another world drop. So it wouldn't surprise me that these loot goblins are sort of your ticket to getting a legendary, like a guaranteed legendary or something close to, or a high odds should you kill it. But I imagine that early on they won't be easy to kill alone.
No, I think it's going to be like a 5-party thing, similar to what are they called? Those rhino things, or the Triceratops things.
That's right. They're right. What it's going to be is the rare spawns that have existed in Warlords and previous expansions have always required, early on in the expansion's life, multiple people to kill them. Some of them could be extended out so you could kill them over time, but with these things having a limited time frame to kill, it's definitely something they want you to have multiple people, at least until the end of the expansion, which, however powerful we become through epics and whatnot, we'll probably be able to take them out solo.
No, one thing that I also think might be a possibility with these treasure demons is throughout the world, with your artifact weapon, you can collect these items which give you artifact power. It's like an unused kind of thing. I'm curious if these will be dropping like even rarer versions of that item, or a large quantity of that item to give you more access to your artifact weapon. Because if that's the case, then it kind of brings a PvE element into play.
Right.
More than just a farming.
Right. So they exist. How often you'll find them is one thing. But what I really want to talk about is, this is another thing, another Diablo-esque concept that's being added to the game. They've already shown off at BlizzCon the challenge mode system, which is almost a note for note. You can compare it to the greater rifts and rifts in Diablo, with increasing difficulty based on the level of your stone, and ultimately leading you to getting higher rewards the higher or deeper you go in. So that's one thing, and they've also shown, and now with the legendaries being world drops, it's another huge key thing from Diablo as a motivation for people to go out and do bounties, which is another thing from Diablo being incorporated into WoW. So it's an ever growing list of things constantly being added, and what I want to talk about is, if they keep adding things, or they keep adjusting mechanics of WoW, which is by genre a very different game, and the way you play WoW is very different than Diablo. But if they keep taking Diablo-esque concepts into WoW, what will the game become?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because what works in Diablo could possibly work in WoW. What doesn't work in Diablo, or what doesn't translate over well, could be the downfall of WoW.
Right.
It's a very fine line, and I think let's start with the treasure goblin we started with there. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, if it encourages people to farm the new legendary world drops, then that doesn't translate well into the raiding scene, because all the top guilds are going to be like, oh my god, we have to find these treasure goblins, we need to get these legendaries, they're going to be so good for us in our early progression, and then that's just going to go down, everyone on the list. Yeah, everyone's going to want these legendaries.
Yeah, so on that note, with that being in mind, I think it's already the way they're handling legendaries is already putting stress on top guilds. I'm pretty sure every top guild is sitting there anxious to hear how the system actually functions. From what we understand, it is just world drops. It's things that drop off of every creature, probably only once you hit level 110. But with these treasure goblins, if they do influence the drop rate of those things, then yes, they'll be hunted. And furthermore, if Blizzard knows that they're going to be hunted so much by the top guilds and by everybody trying to get these really, really rare items, the question is, are they going to influence their spawn rate, make it so that they spawn more often?
I don't think so. I think take for example, I played Diablo for quite a long time, and treasure goblins in Diablo originally were very very rare, and I don't expect Blizzard will be putting these demons or these treasure demons as a constant thing. I think they want them to be as rare as, a rare spawn that people normally farm. If they go that route, then I think it's okay. If they make it so that it spawns on like a timer of every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes or an hour, then I'm kind of worried, because that's going to cause people to kill it, move to, like with the Warbringers, for example. There was 5 Warbringers within Pandaria, and you can go from one spot, kill it, go to the next spot, kill it, go to the next spot, kill it, and just go make a full loop, and then by the time you made it back, it's spawned again. If that's how it's going to be, it's going to really, really suck, depending on how the drops work with that creature. Versus in Diablo, when you found a goblin, it sometimes was very difficult to kill, and when you did kill it, it dropped something of worth to you probably about 20% of the time. So it was a good thing, but also it didn't really change your gameplay at all. You didn't really care if you found a goblin or not. If you did, it was kind of a perk. So that's the way I want to see it translate into WoW. Is if you find one, it's merely on the principle that it just happened to be there.
Right. Okay. So that said, the other part of this is all if they keep adding features. So we have the challenge modes that go into increasing ranks. You can keep pushing it at least up to a point. We don't know what that limit will be, to get increased rewards. I don't think those increased rewards will be specifically higher item level things. I think it'll be more probably more things that you get a chest, and instead of it having 2 drops, it is 3 or 4, depending on the difficulty you did. And every time you do a higher difficulty, you obviously get more loot. I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to make it so that the skilled players can get the items faster. Mm-hmm. Unskilled players will have a chance, but they'll have to wait a week if they fail.
So what I find interesting about the challenge modes is that they are vastly different from that of Diablo.
They're not vastly different at all.
Oh, they in execution they are. In Diablo, you can grind it out. You finish, let's say, a Greater Rift 20, and then you get the next keystone. You do the next one. You do the next one, next one, until you're blue in the face. In the WoW incarnation of it, everyone gets the same keystone each week, and when you complete the challenge mode for that week and you upgrade your keystone, you cannot use that keystone until the following week, when the new stats are revealed for that next week.
Now, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was a system thrown in alongside the keystones that allowed you to upgrade your keystone without the need of completing a dungeon, but that furthering increasing your odds of failure, because if you increase it to a level that you're not comfortable with or not able to do, let's say that you're a player who's comfortable with your team doing level 10 keystones, you would be able at the beginning of the week to not just get a level 1 keystone and have to do the dungeon 9 times, but instead upgrade it to a level 10, either through gold or through some system, and then you go in and get the loot. And for new players, they could do the same thing. They could upgrade it to probably the highest they've ever achieved, and attempt to go finish it and get higher. That's the kind of system I'm thinking is going to be put into place. Because in Diablo, there's that buffering thing where you go into the portal, you kill demons, and keep going through waves until it's too much for you, and that gives you your stone. So there's going to be a mechanic similar.
I think it's going to be something that's going to have to be seen in practice, because they're very vague about it. I like the fact that they're unifying the keystone in general to everyone being on the same page, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that raises a lot of questions. Like they showed off one of the affixes on it, that I thought was very class excluding, which was the healing debuff, where everyone in the party throughout the entirety of the challenge mode will be taking constant damage over time. Now, for strict healers like Paladin and Disc Priest, this poses a pretty interesting problem because they're not the greatest party healers. They're more single target healers, so they're going to run into
Right.
issues when it comes into uh, uh, situations with that debuff and a lot of raid damage at the same time.
You see, now on that note, I think that's actually a good idea because one problem you see with challenge modes, especially in this expansion, and also in MOP, was that challenge modes, there were very specific classes that were very, very good. Right now, enhancement shamans for best times are very useful. Between the ability to stun enemies with their totem, they bring a bloodlust. They have very good AOE and all these other cooldowns. They're very, very useful in challenge modes.
Yeah.
But imagine there was a fix or an affix like that made it so that enemies take 90% reduced AOE damage. Instantly, enhancement shaman's not as useful because their single target isn't there. So instead, you'd bring something along the lines of like a rogue, where their single target damage is actually pretty good, and you bring mages, arcane mages. You start bringing things like that. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with there being a week or two where you're not the ideal class, and maybe even because they're opening up specs, it makes it so that rather than go in there as the one spec you're used to, you go, you know what, this week I'm going to try healing. We're not going to take that extra high thing, or maybe we will, but we're going to go and do the specs that make sense, the specs that can take advantage of the things. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. You're going to see every week there's a different setup that can take part.
Yeah. Another thing I think that will play into the challenge mode is how the actual dungeons will play out. I don't know if you've seen the Halls of Valor yet on the alpha. I have. I've taken the liberty. It is fantastic. There is a lot of AoE. There's a lot of single target. The bosses are very unique, and will be very interesting to see how the challenge mode affixes play a part on that dungeon. Like, again, we've only seen the Halls of Valor. But from what I've seen there, it's challenge modes are not going to be a cakewalk by any means. I mean, they're going to be something that is designed to take a lot of people out of their comfort zone, unlike what they are now. I find that challenge modes now are to the point that they're laughable. And they've been laughable for a long time. The first, I think, second week maybe of Warlords of Draenor, we had gold modes cleared, I think, by method.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, and that was pretty pathetic. And I was expecting that the gold modes would have been cleared at least a month or two after the release.
I don't think that's so much about the difficulty of the challenge mode so much as the skill of the people who are doing them. Because yes, the top guilds, it's never surprising to me anymore when I see a top guild getting something in a crazy time, because this game has always had a difference between the low and the top low and the high, just in terms of skill. People are able to do some crazy stuff and come up with some crazy strategies and do things. I remember in Mists when monks could just gather up the entirety of a dungeon and then just cake smash and kill everything for millions of damage because of the way that vengeance just worked. So, I mean, that doesn't shock me. So that's a separate topic altogether. But, okay, so they are adding things like that. Bounties, they haven't really gone into too much, but I don't imagine there's much to really say.
I believe the bounties will be similar to that of what garrisons are right now. Well, not garrisons. Let's think of the shipyard, the way it works, where you pick up the map and it shows you where the bounty is. You go there, you complete it, it shows you the reward, and blah, 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 blah. And I believe it'll be like something that rotates.
Are you talking about the Apexis dailies? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
Yeah.
sort of. In the naval yard, when you look at the map and you can see where all those things are, it's going to be something similar to that in terms of when you look at your map.
Yeah, I don't care so much about the interface. What I'm talking more about the mechanics of it. The interface is going to be whatever. It's going to be a map. It'll show you where it is. It's no different than if you were to open up the map and you see all the quest markers. It'll be something like that for sure. But I'm saying the mechanics of it are literally going to be. I think it's going to be a table you go to in your order halls or something, or an NPC you speak to that tells you these are the the bounties for either this day or this week. I don't know what they're going to be yet. And you go out, you kill the NPC, you return, and you get rewards. And it's probably going to be, I think it'll be something along the lines of, rather than just doing one, you get like a single reward. It'll be something like Diablo, where you have to complete up to a certain number, and by completing that number of bounties, you get the treasure at the end of the stick. And whether or not you are able to complete those bounties in one day or 1 week, that we'll see. But the thing is, I'm concerned at the number of things that they are taking from largely a different genre of game, because Diablo is not yes, it's an MMO, but in a different way. WoW is about grinding levels, having a group of players coordinate together to complete content, because you can't do PvP alone. You can, but I mean, there's battlegrounds and arenas; those require groups. There's raids, which require groups. There's dungeons, which require groups, and there's a lot of quests that require groups. The single player aspect of WoW is very limited, and that's on purpose, because this game is supposed to push towards the social aspect. Diablo is not like that. Diablo is set up so that nearly every single thing you do in the game can be done alone. There's a way to do it, whether it's greater rifts, which a number of classes, specific monks are crazy right now. They can do some crazy stuff. They can do some ridiculously high greater rifts alone. The entire story can be completed alone. There's no need for anyone but yourself. And bounties can be done alone. All these things can be done alone. If you want to do the higher level stuff, like the different scaling and the higher torments, you might want some help, but it's not required. So with them adding more and more features from Diablo, which is largely a single player game, into WoW, which is largely not a single player game, my concern is that the game is slowly going to start shifting towards the single player in a self-sustaining fashion, where you don't need a guild, where you don't need a server, where you don't need anybody but yourself. And it comes down to a checklist you write on your desk, where it's like, I want to do this today, and I don't need a friend list. I can do it on my own. And with a game that's social structure is already in such disarray, that's trouble. That worries me quite a bit.
I think it boils down to a problem with the social aspect of the game. You know, Blizzard has done everything in their power to make the game as open as possible, but now we have what's called garrison fever, where everyone just sits in their garrison while waiting for their dungeon queue, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't know, you've probably felt the burden of it. You know, you're sitting there and there's nothing really to do in the world, and you feel trapped there. I think
that's
Blizzard,
another important thing.
Yeah.
If with the whole nothing to do, there is actually stuff to do in the world, but it's stuff that's very disinteresting. There's all the you can go over to Nogrind and kill those rare spots and get their trophies or whatever. That's something you do. There's still lots of treasures I haven't collected, but with flying, it's like I can do that at my leisure if I ever actually want to.
Yeah,
I think so there are things to do in the world. They're just not they're not interesting things. They're things that are kind of like tacked on for the people who really, really, really enjoy it.
I think what we have to take into account here is that Blizzard is, I think, trying to get people to do things more on their own, but also not take away from the group aspect as well. Because there are a lot of people that, like we mentioned this on one time before, where you don't really need a guild to do anything. You can do whatever you feel perfectly well on your own. And what makes that difficult for some people is that a lot of new players coming to the game don't understand what it means to be in a guild, or what even having a guild is significant enough to them.
On that note, there's one thing. Blizzard's done a very poor job of teaching new players the ups of coordinated play, because when you get into those pug groups just through the group finder, people don't have that aspect of, I want to complete something because I want to improve and I want to get further. There's this mindset that everyone I'm with obviously is worse than I am, so if we wipe once on anything, I'm done and I'll just go somewhere else. I'll find someone else. So that quality of camaraderie that you get through playing with people that are of either the same skill level or higher skill level or lower is gone, because the only thing you really need a guild for, and even then, not even so much because of how the game works, is mythic raids.
and Mythic Dungeons to a certain degree.
Kind of. Mythic Dungeons
And this
are
is
pretty
something
easy.
that I actually find interesting about the artifact quests themselves going into Legion is that they actually teach you things that not a lot of players understand. So taking case in point here, the Discipline Priest, or not Discipline, the Shadow Priest artifact quest, it actually teaches you offensive dispelling, which is not something that many casual players know how to do. There's a part in the quest line where you actually have to use mass dispel on a group of enemies, or else you'll die.
Right, right.
So
Well, that's
it's things
something.
like that that I really like that they're bringing in, but I think they should incorporate into other things like um, do a quest that requires you and your group to coordinate a certain thing.
This
Um,
is something that is present in a lot of other MMOs as well, because I do Final Fantasy, but I play Final Fantasy as well.
yeah.
And the one major thing that I think in Final Fantasy does well is the class story quests actually do a lot of the times require you to do things that you would probably not do in normal gameplay, except for those specific circumstances that you would have to do. So like WoW has done it once very well in the past, and that would be the Warlock Fire quest.
Yes.
That was when I did it. That was one of the few times I actually used Control Demon or Enslaved Demon in a very, because up until that point there hasn't really been any real use for it except for having some fun in PvP or just taking control of a demon because you want it for a few minutes.
Yeah, it
Um,
was very interesting because I had a warlock back in MOP that I didn't really play too much, and doing the warlock quest was kind of an eye opener for me to realize that there was a lot about the warlock that I had totally forgotten about.
oh yeah,
Enslaved demon wasn't even on my bar. I didn't even realize that the game the spell was still in the game.
that's right.
So it's things like that that I think need to come back to the game to make the game not just something that everyone remembers from the past, but newer players can come and learn and enjoy what the game was originally. And I think it's shying away from what it
Right.
was,
So the,
and
the
it's trying to become something else.
yeah. So that's what the heart of this all is that the game the game's obviously old. It's 10 years. 11 years as of
Almost 11
it
years.
is
Yeah.
11 years as of the last couple weeks. We just had the anniversary. Um, it's 11 years old, and I think the problem is that yes, MMOs are shifting. They're going away from the grindy style.
Mm.
Even Korean MMOs are turning less grindy. But I think the problem is that the rather than go towards the good aspects of a bunch of other MMOs, like Final Fantasy, which has a bunch of features which I think would fit perfect into WoW, um, they're going towards a game which is not built around the idea of constant updates, not built around the idea of getting new environments and new dungeons and things. The environments in Diablo have not changed in 2 years. When did the expansion
Yeah,
launch?
the Reaper Souls came out March 2014, and we're going into 2016 now.
Yeah, so the environments have
So
been the same for 2+ years.
yeah, and it's only now patch 2.4 for Diablo, which is coming out in January, is adding in 2 new zones,
Right,
and that's almost 2 years after it released.
right. So
So
the system
their
is
their their timeline is very 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 gapped,
right.
and it causes players to feel that um, the pressure of being stuck in the same environment over and over again, and that's kind of what's going on right now with Warlords is that there's nothing to do.
This is a very
uh,
claustrophobic
yeah.
expansion. You're always stuck in the same environment, always over and over again. And don't get me wrong, WoW is repetition. There's a lot of repetition between the ways quests work. A lot of the environments, as good as Blizzard has done, even like if you've gone through and requested since Cataclysm, they did a very good job rebuilding the world and making it feel more varied. But you take a look at zones like you go into what is it called, the Searing Gorge, and then you go to Blasted Lands. Uh, they look very similar. They have red skies, red rocks, and creatures. And yes, one has more fire stuff, but it's those kinds of things that are hard to change. But the thing is, they did a good job of varying it. The problem we have now is they're they're making the game similar to something that doesn't need variation, because the variation for Diablo doesn't come from the world that you're in. It comes through the challenge of it. The challenge, you fight the same creatures, the same bosses, the same things, but the bosses, every time you find them, has a different ability or a different buff or something like that. So if they incorporate that into WoW, and let's say they expand it in towards the dungeon and raiding system, does that mean that we're just getting into a point where 1 week we go into a mythic fight, and that mythic boss has a new mechanic because of the week? That week he's immune to, or he has thunder damage, or he has a double the health, or he has this thing, and your strategy has to change.
Are you referring to Mythic Dungeon or Mythic Raid?
Raids. I'm talking about both. I'm talking about everything.
Okay.
If they do that, are they building my biggest question is, like, are they building a system that doesn't require them to update? Are they trying to put it in such a way so that they can put the minimal amount of updates as possible and expand upon the longevity of the game? Because if that's the case, that turns me off.
You see, yeah, I agree. Like, in Diablo's defense, people who play Diablo, who are diehard Diablo fans, they already know what they're getting themselves into. They know that the game is a grindy game. They know that it's going to take lots of dedicated hours to fulfill themselves on that game. And myself, I've gotten burned out on Diablo. I started this current season, really hyped for it, and then within the first 2 weeks, I did everything I needed to in that season, and I haven't looked back.
That's right. Yeah, it's a leaderboard game.
Yeah.
Where I was the same. I had the Crusader, and I got the gear, and I was doing I was doing crazy damage. I was doing millions upon millions of damage, and I was just like, the only thing left for me right now is to do slightly more damage, but the challenge is going to be relatively the same, because it's very linear. The challenge doesn't spike as you go up, except for the greater rifts. So the problem I have is, if you're a WoW player who's been playing WoW for a long time, or even someone who's new but has played other MMOs, the system you're probably used to is one that you have to level up, one that you have to go on a gear curve to get the best gear, and ultimately challenge yourself to get that gear, because the mythic stuff is not easy. The mythics this expansion are not easy. Don't anybody fool you.
They're not.
But
I agree with that.
Right, but if you are that kind of player, what if you're that kind of player and you don't like Diablo, and then the game turns into Diablo, the game that you like?
It's gonna be. It almost seems to me like Blizzard's trying to end something. Like they just want this game to end and start something else. It's almost as if they're trying to fall back onto Overwatch, kind of.
I don't think Overwatch is going to be a saving grace, but it does seem that Blizzard's trying to put the game in a way that it requires less frequent updates, that it's more self-sustaining, that they don't have to constantly pay attention to balance, and like with the systems that they're putting in and the things that they're adding, the question I have is, like, how much further are they willing to take it, and at what point does it stay the World of Warcraft that everybody grew up with? Because it does look like it's changing, and there are some things I think are good. Like, don't get me wrong, Diablo is a good game, and there are a lot of features from it that I think work well. But it's a different game. It has a different style. It has a different setting. It has a different purpose.
It's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. Like, one thing that we're merely speculating on a few things here. We don't know the final result yet. So
right. So it's interesting to see.
It's an interesting subject matter at most. I'm curious to see how the overall challenge mode structure is going to actually play out. How the reward system's going to play out, and
I'm curious to see the rewards. I'm curious to see how they plan to.
Because if the rewards are worth it, and there's something that scale with the content of which is out, then I can see challenge modes being relevant. But if it's currently like it is in this incarnation of challenge mode, where they were only relevant for the first month, and then
that was the big thing. I think that the biggest turnoff was the silliest decision was to allow it so you can get 640. Was it 640? I think it was 645. But there was epic loot you can get at the beginning of the expansion. That was the biggest turnoff. The reward for doing challenge mode should be, and should have always been, vanity. Nothing more. If you want to do it, do it. But feeling the need to do it, at least on silver, or I don't know if you had to do it
No, you just had to complete the
You just
challenge
had to
mode.
complete it.
Yeah,
So
you
it didn't
didn't
matter.
even
It didn't
get a
matter what
rank.
time you did it. You just had to complete it.
Mhm.
The silliness of it all was that it early on, when there was no raid, the dungeons gave significantly weaker gear than what was available from challenge modes, and the rest of the gear crafted was thing. It gave a power spike to players who put in enough time or dedicated enough to sit there for however long it took to finish one of these things, and
Yeah.
that I think was a mistake. I don't know if they're going to do that again. But anyway, so we're
Anyways,
instead of preaching the whole Diablo thing, I
yeah.
think that it's just something I'm curious to know what everybody else thinks about it. I am concerned that the game is heading in a direction that it is self-sustaining, but we'll see if you agree or you disagree. Put it in the comments. Let me know. But I want to move on to a couple things that I actually do
I
like.
want to talk about the artifacts and class halls.
Right. Yes.
I've absolutely been in love with a lot of the artifacts as of late. My most favorite one being the Death Knight artifact quest line is absolutely incredible. Have you seen anything on it yet?
I
or
haven't. I haven't looked
Oh,
into it.
so
I'm trying
going
to keep myself spoiler free on that end because I
I'm
want to
gonna
enjoy
try
it.
and keep this as spoiler free as possible. I'm not gonna give a little bit away,
Yeah,
but
don't give it away.
we
Let's leave it.
do get a little bit of interaction with Bolvar in the Frozen Throne, which is really neat. Not that's as much as I'm gonna say about
His butt must be freezing.
it. Must be freezing because it's really cool. Uh, but one thing that's not really a spoiler, but each class, like I was really worried that there would be overlap for like different specs of the same class, like take Frost and Unholy for example, right? Like how they would go into their artifact would be very very similar, but no, Blizzard did a fantastic job keeping each spec unique and fresh and relevant. And looking at the gameplay for Frost and Unholy, because that's all that I've seen so far, uh, the gameplay feels very similar to that as it was in End of Wrath and early Cataclysm. So going back to the Death Knight roots is kind of a big turn on for me for the Death Knight. Death Knight was one of my favorite classes to play back then. I mained a Death Knight.
Well,
So
the big thing with these artifacts, like number one, the one thing I like the current talent system. It's okay. I've gotten used to it. I'm one of those guys. I'm an old school. I like the old system. I think that there was more things you could do with that old system, but they're bringing it back in a way through the artifacts. So I'm psyched up for that because it changes how we can play our class a little bit. But more importantly, these quests that you do to get to your artifact, it's a opportunity for Blizzard to flex their lore muscles, like just pump it out there, because like the Warlock quest that we were talking about before, to get the green fire, these quests offer an opportunity to breathe life into a class or set of classes that previously had very little going on. So now we get to see what's actually happening with the leaders of those classes, what's happening with the lore of these classes, why they would do something, why would they go for certain weapons, what they can do with those weapons, and what makes you stand out as a hero amongst all these people. So that's really cool.
That's actually an interesting comment you made there. One thing I did find a little odd about the artifacts is that you don't really feel like you do, like they're very short and sweet, no more than about 20 to 30 minutes, and you've got your artifact in your class hall established, and that's for every class. The longest one being if I recall is the Shadow Priest, which took me about 40 minutes to get through. But yeah,
you might just suck as Shadow Priest.
no, it's very lengthy, the Shadow Priest one.
Okay.
It's very lengthy, but it's really sad because you pick up, take the Unholy Death Knight one, you do a whole bunch of things, and then you're there for maybe a span of 5-10 minutes, and then you get your artifact, and you're like, wow, anybody could have got this artifact.
Here's the question. Well, for one thing, they're not supposed to be difficult. Don't get confused. This isn't like the legendaries where the legendary weapons back in the day required dedication, and the people who got it first were usually people who rated at the higher level. That's not what these are for. They're supposed to be nice, sweet, short, but give you a lot of story and push forward. And it's possible to add on to the story through patches. I'm hoping that they do. Everybody's supposed to have one. It's the mechanic of the game. This is the new garrison system, basically. It's the equivalent, where everybody gets a garrison. It wasn't hard to get your garrison. It literally only requires that you play the game. So artifacts are supposed to be like that. Now, the question I have is, with the Death Knights, do the Unholy Death Knights and Blood Death Knights and Frost Death Knights all meet Bolvar?
Yes.
They all do.
Yeah. The Blood, I'm not sure.
But the Unholy and
the Unholy and the Frost, definitely.
One thing that I wanted to know was especially for classes that have the multiple specs, but have a huge major lore character. Because Bolvar and the Lich King they're huge. They're titans of lore for Death Knights. So I was curious if it was the case that only one of the specs would get to meet the head honcho himself, because if that's the case, it steals away the thunder, so to speak.
It's really interesting.
Just don't spoil it.
I'm trying to keep this a spoiler. Like, it's very hard to answer this question without saying spoilers.
I know. It's kind of a
so what I will say though is that Bolvar is a prominent force for the DKs in general. Okay. If that is as spoiler free as I can get. Like, okay,
he takes part in the quest, which I think everybody kind of expected.
Yes.
It's like me saying that Thrall is going to take part in the Shaman quest. Big surprise. Like, come on. Okay. Class halls. I think they look good. I looked through the pictures of them and I advise anybody who hasn't seen them to go check them out, because they look.
But they aren't done yet, though.
They're not done yet.
They're still under construction, but they look pretty good.
They scream the classes that they represent.
My
the
favorite
only thing
one
to improve them, I think, would be to basically have banners across the side.
Yeah.
Just saying what class hall it is. Just really rub it in. That's like this. Like, if you look at the Druid class hall, it's freaking Moonglade. Come on.
Yeah. For me, my favorite one so far was the Paladin class hall. Oh, that is just so fucking cool.
That one seems like the most complete, because that was the one they showed off at both the Gamescom trailer and also BlizzCon.
It's not fully done yet, but for those, I'm trying to keep this as spoiler free as I possibly can for those who are curious about it. How you get into the class hall is absolutely insane. Like, you get there and you're like, where is it? And then you click this thing, and then this magical thing happens, and you're like, oh my god, this is awesome. This is a Paladins right away.
But they've done a very good job representing the classes that go to these class halls. There's like both in, a lot of people were concerned, for example, with the rogues being in the underbelly. But believe me, it looks exactly like what you would expect for a rogue.
And the warrior one was probably the one that shocked me the most.
The warrior one confused me, because for a long time when we were having discussions internally, I thought they were going to go with a similar sort of approach. Do you remember there was the Berserker Island, basically, that you went to?
Where you got Berserker.
I thought it was going to be sort of like that, where you went to an island, which was just like this a bunch of random shacks and a bunch of people, wounded and all these things, and a big blood pit where warriors get to just wrestle.
Everyone who's paying attention to this probably is like, I don't understand. I have to spoil this because it needs to be known. The warriors actually go to the Halls of Valor in Legion on the Broken Isles, which was really bizarre. I found that they would go there, but the storyline is absurd and crazy and just full of warrior lore. If you're into Norse mythology, it's there.
It's Valhalla.
Yeah, it's Valhalla.
It's the resting place for warriors and Vikings who served and died through battle honorably. It's basically the heaven that they go to. So it didn't occur to me that would happen. It should have, because they have freaking Valhalla in the game.
Yeah,
they're putting it in, but it's still, I wasn't sure what they were doing. I guess at the point that we had this discussion way back when, they hadn't actually shown it off. I don't believe. Because
they hadn't shown it off because they wanted to keep it a secret, but unfortunately, with Halls of Valor being released as a dungeon, and the class halls at the same time, it just kind of happened.
Right.
So.
But that's one thing, and the other thing is that because of how the class halls work, with them representing their classes. I'm hoping that they can actually bridge the world story, the overarching story, into it, so that you feel. Because one thing I think that that Warlords really missed an opportunity on, as much as cool as it was to have storied cutscenes at the end of each zone, and as cool as it was to have the garrison campaign link into each raid, my biggest problem was that it never felt like we were needed. The people who were the NPCs like Yrel and Duratan and even
Marad and
all these NPCs, they were the ones telling the story. It was their story, and we just kind of happened to be witnesses to their story. And for a game where one of the major advertisement things, one of the big things that they were promoting was that we are the guys in the front lines and we're the champions, we're the generals.
I never got a sense of that.
Exactly. We were promoted to general, quote unquote. We never actually got titles, so it's lies. But I don't feel that we ever really attained that rank. It never felt like that we were the pushing force behind.
It felt almost like we're on the back of a train.
Yeah.
Being
Archimond
dragged everywhere,
And I think part of that's because of the limitations of the system, with them having their pre-rendered, not so much pre-rendered, but in-game cutscenes that they do, which were rendered using an in-game engine, but not done in-game. Very big difference. They couldn't use our character models in the cutscenes, and obviously we don't have voices. But it's because of that limitation. Even when Archimond fell, and I don't know if you've seen if you're watching, you haven't seen the Archimond cutscene, go watch it. Or go kill him. Just kill him, for crying out loud.
Easy. Even
his death, with it just being you have Grom, he's there. You have Yrel, she's there. You have Khadgar, who's there. Where are we?
Yeah, I know. It was really odd. And even on top of that, where was Duratan? Where was
where the hell was Duratan?
Where was Garona, who was helping Khadgar?
Right, okay. Now that's
anyway,
different.
We're going into a different thing.
But my whole thing is that it never felt like it felt like we were just kind of being used to make these heroes get the job done. And that's the biggest failing, I think, of this expansion. So what I want to see in Legion, with us having literally an order hall for each class, and us supposedly being like the kind of icons of each of these classes, find a way to include us in the story. Find a way to make it so that we are the ones, either singularly us, or inclusively everybody, multiple people in our group. Find a way to make it so that we are the ones getting stuff done. Because it doesn't.
And that's actually one thing that it does exist in Legion, believe it or not. I don't know if you've seen the new text boxes that they have, the animation boxes.
Well, that's
the old
I've seen
the old
those.
Warcraft 3.
I have seen those.
In the class halls, those actually will pop up periodically, and your followers in the class hall will talk to you about objectives and stuff and things that you've done in the world on a regular basis, which is really neat. So you really do get that sense of you every time you're in your class hall, you're respected, you're known, you are the head honcho, there ain't nobody else. And I think that's really cool. On top of that, when you're out in the world, every NPC you come across will refer to you as commander, will refer to you as leader or Doombringer or whatever.
Right. That's right. That's something that happens in game currently. When you walk around your garrison, and even if you walk into certain places, you get salutes, and they'll say commander and all these things. That is cool. But I'm talking more about when we clear a dungeon. For example, they actually did it a couple times. For example, Grimrail Depot. When you clear the dungeon, when you're going through the dungeon, you get to that point where you're about to jump on the train. It stops. It starts an in-game cutscene, which I think is pretty cool, showing all of you jumping onto this train. They need to include more of that, even if there's no dialogue and it's just animations, because it's not exclusively your character; it's your party. It's all 5 members of your party taking part in this cutscene, albeit everybody sees their role in a different perspective, but it's all of you taking part in this thing. Whatever the cutscene does, in this case, you jumped onto a train. They need to include more of that, so that when you kill a boss, maybe at the end of the boss fight, it shows your raid group, there doing something to win the fight, maybe alongside these super NPCs. But I think that's something that's limited in WoW, specifically WoW, because this stuff is very much represented in nearly every other game these days. And it's whether or not it's an engine deficiency, like they don't have the power to do it, or it's something that they just haven't really thought about doing, is hard to say. But it's something I feel that it's something that needs to come in so that we feel like we're actually accomplishing something.
Yeah, I agree. But overall, I think what's interesting about the artifacts and the class halls the most for me is the fact that it is very gripping story. There are prominent lore characters there. Any lore junkie is going to have their fill, and each class feels unique, feels different,
Okay.
and I think a lot of players will really, really enjoy their artifact and their class hall. And on top of the artifacts themselves, even cosmetically, the fact that there's different skins that you can obtain throughout the expansion,
That's a very smart move.
that is brilliant. Like, take in the Demon Hunter, or not Demon Hunter, the Death Knight unholy weapon, Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Some of the animations or the skins for Apocalypse, like the final one there's like it's almost like a Psy looking or scythe one. It's brilliant. Taking the Demon Hunter ones, there's one that you can look like you're wielding a fiery blade on each end, and it's just some of them are impressive.
Speaking of dual wielding, I want to get off this topic pretty quick, but this is just a comment. I don't like how the shamans are forced to use an elemental weapon in their offhand, especially since we were given. It's silly to me because we were given a Doomhammer from. I'm assuming we don't have thralls. I'm pretty sure the one we get is probably going to be the original one from Draenor because we have access to Draenor. But I think it would have been better if we had access to two Doomhammers. Can you imagine how cool that would have been?
I personally think, when I think of an enhancement shaman, from when I remember enhancement, was a two-handed enhancement weapon.
Bring back two-handed enhancement.
I know, right?
I love it.
Because even when you watch like the Thrall versus Garrosh cutscene at the end of Nagrand, he goes in there. He's using it both hands on that weapon. That weapon is huge. It's massive. It's not a one-handed weapon.
Yeah, that's right. It's a freaking warhammer.
Yeah.
The big thing is that you think of every lore character who's a shaman. They're either using a staff, they're using a one-handed mace, or they're using like a two-handed mace. They never dual wield. No, none of them do, and it's like I might be wrong, but through the ones that I remember, they always do something. Anyway, so with that, I think that the class halls, they look good. I'm hoping the stories mesh well and make it so that you feel more important in the story, because it's something that I think has been diminished over time and in some cases non-existent. But moving on, it's a few other things that I think have been diminished were the legendaries. I think
what a sad time for legendaries.
I already had issues. And the thing is the mop. I don't have a problem with everybody getting one. That's never been too much of an issue for me, because it kind of ended up that way anyway. Between earning, because in Cataclysm, for example, I got the staff, but earning the staff above and getting it slightly sooner than someone else, that felt cool. When it came to mop, everybody getting the legendary all at the same time, that the problem I had was that the way that it was written was that you were the only one helping Rathian. It would have been different, and they did the same thing here in this expansion. They attempted to make it sound like you were the legendary one, but then when everybody gets them very literally on the same day, that brings the problem. Everybody got it on the same day.
Let's bring it back to even Wrath of the Lich King for just a minute. I remember playing Wrath of the Lich King. I was a Blood Death Knight back then, when it was the DPS spec, not the tank spec. And I remember going for my Shadowmourne, and the adventure that I went on it was lengthy. It was engaging. You felt like you earned
and it required
that legendary
the coordination of a raid group. You couldn't do that alone.
Yes.
The way that legendaries are set up now is you can do them Maybe not first, but for example, the ring. What part of it do you actually need any specific group of people to complete? Because you can get every
I will.
single piece out of LFR.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like I am playing my hunter. My hunter was my very first character that I ever made. I abandoned him since the end of Cataclysm, and recently just started picking him up again. I've been playing him about a month now, and I'm almost done my
Right.
legendary ring. And I've never set foot into normal, heroic, or mythic dungeons or raids. I've never set foot in anything but LFR and my garrison. And the fact that I can sit there and literally log in for maybe 25
That's
to
right.
an
That's right.
hour a day and do this once a week,
Yeah.
you know,
Now the thing is
it's
like,
ridiculous. I don't.
yes, it's true you don't get them first, but the point of the game is that the fact that you can get them at all without having to put any effort it dramatically takes away the legendary factor. So with that,
And on
before we go
top
on,
of that,
so with them already taking away the legendary factor, they further cement it as being less lustrous by making it so that they drop off creatures, random creatures in the world, perhaps in the random, because this is all speculation. They haven't gone into full detail, but the speculation is that it's similar to that of Diablo, where killing rare mobs, specific creatures, or random creatures rather, in the world and all things, you can grind out very random legendaries that will drop of varying effects, and a lot of them are powerful. Some of them are like class breaking powerful, that have abilities. For example, I believe it's a helm for paladins that increases or makes it so you gain one holy power every second while avenging wrath is up. And while that might sound whatever, that's crazy. That is just, can you? It makes it so that you can just spam attacks, and that is nuts. That is something that if it was a talent, you take that talent. That's the kind of ability it is. And a lot of these, the cloaks and whatever else they all have them. And from the looks of it, a number of these things are not confined to the rules of the game that we're used to. They do not, some of them say, for example, plate, agility, agility, strength, intellect, which begs the question: are these things stuck to plate, or is it one of those items that drops and becomes the item that your class can use?
here's one for example. It's a legendary that's in the database right now for on Wowhead. It's a neck piece, and the effect is your heal over time effects have a chance to trigger their full remaining value each time they heal or deal damage.
That is nuts. If you're a druid or you're a monk or you're a holy priest,
A holy
and
priest?
I think paladins still keep their heal over time on some spells. I forget.
I
We'll
don't
see.
know
We'll
if
see. But
Eternal
for
Flame
sure,
is
and
there, but
even a shaman with Riptide, having the entire full heal, because if you add it up and a rejuve, let's say it takes for what do they usually take for right now? About 3,000, 4,000. Well,
something like
I
that.
don't heal
That's fine.
if you can't tell, but let's say they tick for 3,000, and there's still 10 ticks left, before the duration ends, and it procs even just halfway through. That is 15,000 of a heal just instantly on the target. That requires
Mhm.
zero thought on your part. That all you need to do is get a hot on them, and you're
What would be better for that legendary is if it was a use effect on a
well.
2 minute
I don't know
cooldown.
about that. I don't.
I would almost prefer anyway. So we're getting into
But my
something
point
that
is
I
that
really don't
the legendary world
think is
drops, I
relevant.
think,
But
are out of all the things. I think it's a bad idea. I would have preferred.
I think it would
I
be
would have
better
pref-
suited is if they were
No, I
raid
think
drops.
that
I think
I
that would
think
be
that
much
if this is
better.
the system that they were thinking about going with, they were better off not including it. Because I think that the artifact, if this could be an expansion, the thing that people forget, legendaries do not need to be in WoW. There's no template saying that legendaries have to exist in an expansion. And the artifact weapons, being artifacts, which by the way, color wise are a grade above legendary, that system alone makes it so that these legendaries aren't necessary. Because they could have made the artifacts they already are the very specific class quests that everybody has to do to earn them, and they could just expand upon that, and you can upgrade your your artifact as you go. The legendaries didn't need to be here. The legendaries could have been forego completely, and all those cool procs could have been turned into set bonuses or turned into things that exist in the artifact.
I think the biggest issue with the legendaries being drops is the fact that
No,
anyone
I
can
don't have a
get
problem with
them.
everybody getting them because they've been already doing that.
No, I mean, like, I don't agree with the fact that they're in open world. I would much rather them be placed like on a boss drop list, kind of similar to that of like Illidan
The
and
problem,
Kil'jaeden
the
in
biggest
Burning
issue,
Crusade, where when they dropped, it was like, oh, it dropped, and it wasn't like super
um,
like
yeah, but the
common,
big thing back
you know.
then, especially if it's on, for example, the Illidan and final bosses, those bosses back then were not killed nearly as much as the end bosses are right now, on their respective difficulties. Um, and I think going away from that system was a good idea, because number one, it was one of those things that they drop, and it just makes a problem for the group because who gets it? It'd be different if it was personal loot, but
Mhm.
I think letting everybody get the legendaries is fine because it balances out the power gain across the board. No one has one item above anybody else that they can't get on their own. And with those items, you can say the same
Mhm.
thing, but let's face it, the chances of you getting it if you're not in a raiding guild, like the glaives, the war glaives, good luck trying to get those if you're not in a raiding guild. Because you go with any coordinated group, you can rest assured that those things are on reserve for somebody. The
Mhm.
bigger problem is that top guilds have to get these items. If you're in a top guild, and I've raided with top guilds, and that's another thing I'm going to talk about later in another video. But um, if you don't have your best in slot legendary item, you're wrong. It's not a question of your luck sucks. It's a question. It's a fact. You suck. Go get it because it is something that instantly makes you better without any effort except for putting it on. So you need to have it.
Mhm.
And that's the problem. And for people who, there's a number of people even in hardcore who can very literally only show up to do the minimum amount they can. They show up, they raid, they go to sleep, because they have lives, they have work, they have
Mhm.
school, they have whatever else they're doing. For you to be instantly or possibly benched because you don't have that extra hour in a week to go farm these items that everybody else has gotten because they can play 20 hours extra in a week. That sucks. That sucks a lot. And unfortunately, it is something in this game that happens all the time. And if you don't believe me, go apply to be fully mythic geared, but don't have a legendary ring. Go apply to any mythic guild, and they will deny you on the spot because they don't want to have to wait. You'd have to make a damn good
Mhm.
case for yourself to get into these things because they're not about catering. They're about equal partnership. You're supposed to put in as much effort, if not more effort, than everybody else in the guild to achieve the same goal. So by not having that crucial piece, it's bad. It looks bad on your part because it tells them you're not serious, and I think that's bad, and I think that's something that Blizzard is now um, promoting without meaning to.
Legendaries pose a problem in
Yeah,
many
but world
many
drops
ways. Like,
really just take them out. They don't need to be here. We don't need them.
what I would like to see at the very least, if they are going to keep this model, do not make the legendaries available until after the first
I
major
think they
content
should just get rid
patch.
of them completely. But yeah, if they push them down, it's going to be a delayed process. It's going to be the same thing. Anyway, I wanna
Because,
close this discussion off. But
yeah,
so, my final thoughts, like kind of covering everything over again. I think the game is turning into Diablo, for better and for worse. I think that the legendaries should probably not exist in the mindset that they're putting them in, or in the system that they're putting them in. Artifacts,
mhm.
class halls, I think are great. I think it's something that is really cool, as long as they can also make you feel like you're an important member of the game. Um, what about
Yeah.
you? What do you think?
I'm really like for me personally, I'm really looking forward to the experience of the class halls and seeing more than just me in my class hall because you have access to seeing every one of your class on your server
Oh,
in your
actually,
class hall.
here's
Uh,
a here's the thing. What do you think of
that's really
Demon Hunter?
cool. Oh my
Okay,
God, I
cool. We'll talk
cannot
about it
wait.
later.
I am. I am so
It's
excited
just-
for Demon Hunter. They look.
I just realized
I.
we haven't said a word. Demon
Uh,
Hunters look cool. I'm not gonna play one. Don't
I
get me wrong.
mean,
I'm gonna play it as like an alt, but yeah.
really quick here. I've actually had um, many thoughts about the Demon Hunter and whether or not because right now I play a warrior, and Demon Hunter is like a mix between warrior and rogue. They're quick moving and they hit hard, and they are absolutely a joy
Yeah,
to be around. And I
the way they
absolutely
move around is pretty cool. Anyway, but that's it for today. Yeah, Legion does look like a good expansion. I'm always a pessimist when it comes to this stuff. You'll see, if you haven't figured that out, you will. Um, I'd like to know what everybody else's thoughts. If you have any thoughts on how the expansion's progressing, just leave a comment in the section below. Other than that, thanks for watching, and final thoughts, Lee?
I want to
Okay,
play
cool.
Demon Hunter.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for talking, and for everybody watching, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.